Have you ever seen a movie that critics are just raving about? Calling it a masterpiece, a must-see, a surefire Oscar contender? Well, what if at the same time, audiences were calling that exact same film unwatchable propaganda? That is the wild story of one battle after another. Today we're going to break down what happens when a film splits its audience right down the middle, and we'll do it by digging into one of the most blistering critiques out there to figure out what is going on. So masterpiece or hate watch? How can one single film get such polar opposite reactions? To get to the bottom of it, we're going to look at a super detailed review from the YouTube channel Hate Watchers. And look, they don't just dislike the movie. They've given it a very specific label, an absolute hate watch. That's a piece of media that is so bad, or maybe just so ideologically frustrating, that you find yourself watching it almost out of morbid curiosity or maybe even rage. So, let's walk through their arguments and really dissect the anatomy of this controversial film.
Okay, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get into the reviewer's main argument about what they see as the film's hidden agenda. Then, we'll dig into their big problems with the characters and the politics. After that, we'll look at the plot itself, then the huge disconnect between critics and the box office, and finally, we'll land on their pretty damning final verdict.
All right, let's jump right in. What is the biggest, most fundamental problem that the reviewer has with this film? Well, their argument is that one battle after another pretends to be this cool, quirky thriller, but underneath that disguise, it's actually a story that goes out of its way to romanticize domestic terrorism. And they're not saying this is, some subtle subtext. They insist it is the entire point of the movie.
And this right here is the heart of what Hate Watchers calls the bait and switch. They point out that the trailers, they all focus on this paranoid dad looking for his daughter. But they say the trailers were very, very carefully edited to hide the fact that the main characters are this whole network of anti-capitalist terrorists. I mean, they're bombing banks, destroying infrastructure, breaking immigrants out of detention centers, the whole shebang. The argument is that this wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate trick to get people in the door who would have never bought a ticket otherwise.
So, that brings us to the first huge pillar of their critique, the characters. According to the review, even if you can somehow get on board with the film's premise, it's just impossible to get invested in the story because every single person on screen is, there's no nice way to put it, they're just horrible people.
Wow, this quote from the review really says it all, doesn't it? This isn't a story about complicated anti-heroes or flawed protagonists that you can still root for. Nope, the argument here is that these characters are just fundamentally, irredeemably bad. For the reviewer, this just created this feeling of total disgust that made it absolutely impossible to connect with the story on any emotional level.
So what does that actually look like in the movie? Well, let's break it down. First off, the protagonists aren't just protesters. They are actual, unrepentant killers who murder police officers. And a key point the reviewer makes is that they never, not once, show any remorse or even question what they're doing. So how does the movie try to make you like them? By making the villains, the system, even more cartoonishly evil. And this creates what the reviewer calls a race to the bottom, where you're left with absolutely no one to sympathize with, no one to root for.
Okay, so we've covered the characters. Let's move on to the reviewer's second huge issue, the film's political message. The argument is that beyond just having unlikable people, the whole movie is built on this incredibly simplistic, really heavy-handed political worldview.
The reviewer actually made up a term for it. A childish, black and white worldview. And it's exactly what it sounds like. They say the movie has no gray areas, zero nuance. One side is everything the filmmakers think is good, and the other side is everything they think is evil, and there is absolutely no room for anything in between. And this is pretty much what that worldview looks like in action, according to the review. On the hero's side, you've got terrorists, anti-capitalist revolutionaries, people of color, and illegal immigrants. And on the villain side, it's cartoonishly racist, white supremacist, white men, and system enforcers. The reviewer points out that every single villain is a white man, some of whom are part of a literal secret white supremacist club called the Christmas Adventurous Club. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, and it's this total lack of subtlety that the reviewer really couldn't stand.
So the big takeaway here isn't just that the film has politics. Lots of films do. It's that the reviewer sees it as straight-up propaganda. They call it preachy, they call it purposefully divisive. Basically, it's hammering home its message with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. And the review makes a prediction that because of this, the film is going to age like milk, and all its on-the-nose political commentary is just going to seem cringy in a few years.
But here's the thing. Even if you could somehow get past the characters and the politics, the reviewer argues that the movie just fails on the most basic level. The story is completely broken. They admit the cast is solid, the cinematography looks great, but they say the fundamental narrative is just a total mess.
And this timeline they laid out really shows the problem. The movie is 2.5 hours long, but the first 45 minutes, a huge chunk of the film, is nothing but backstory. The actual plot, the whole thing with the dad looking for his daughter, is crammed into this chaotic 36-hour period that makes up the entire rest of the movie. It's just bizarrely structured.
And the verdict on that plot? It's harsh. The reviewer calls it weak and only surface deep, and argues that all the chaotic pacing is just there to hide the fact that there's no real substance. This makes the 2.5-hour runtime feel, and I'm quoting here, excruciating. They even pointed to this one bonkers example, a car chase that lasts almost 4 minutes, where the cars just drive in silence, not even getting closer to each other. The reviewer said only a psychopath would leave that in the final cut of a movie.
And this right here brings us to the central mystery of one battle after another. If the characters are awful, the politics are preachy, and the plot is a mess, like this review claims, then why on earth are professional critics just showering it with praise? This is where it gets really, really interesting.
Okay, so first, let's look at the praise. As the reviewer points out, the film is sitting at a really impressive 85% on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics are calling it a masterpiece. There's tons of awards buzz. I mean, on paper, this thing is a huge critical success.
But then, you look at the audience. The film made just $48 million worldwide on its opening weekend. Now, for a big movie with this much hype and this many stars, that is a shockingly low number. It's a massive red flag that everyday moviegoers are just not connecting with this film at all.
And here is the number that puts it all into perspective. The movie's reported budget was a whopping $175 million. I mean, when you put that number next to a $48 million opening, the math just doesn't work. The reviewer concludes there is basically no way this movie turns a profit and argues that this financial failure is the ultimate proof that the film is just completely out of touch.
So all of this, the characters, the politics, the box office, it all builds to the reviewer's final damning judgment. After picking apart every single piece of this film, the Hate Watchers channel delivers its final word.
And the critique isn't just about whether the movie is entertaining or not. The reviewer argues that the timing of its release makes its message particularly irresponsible. Their point is that putting out a movie that glorifies radicals committing violence against law enforcement is just incredibly tone-deaf and even dangerous in today's social and political climate.
So there it is. The final verdict is crystal clear. The movie is officially labeled an absolute hate watch. The reviewer calls it one of the most ham-fisted movies they've seen in years, and they even compare it unfavorably to actual propaganda from extremist groups, saying this movie does an even better job of romanticizing terror. It's a complete 100% rejection of the film on every single level: artistic, political, and moral.
And that kind of leaves us with this big question, doesn't it? The whole saga of one battle after another is a perfect example of this growing divide we see all over the place. You have one group hailing a film as a masterpiece and another condemning it as dangerous propaganda. It really makes you wonder, when the experts and the audience are on completely different planets, who do you trust? And what does it say about the kinds of stories we're all choosing to tell?